Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. The Texas Tribune is reporting that an influential group called the True Texas Project is hosting a conference in July that will actively promote Christian nationalism and Great Replacement theory. This group, the report says, has ties to many Texas GOP officials, including Senator Ted Cruz and Attorney General Ken Paxton, a major national MAGA celebrity and leading supporter of Donald Trump. We think this opens a window on a broader story, the ways in which GOP elites are increasingly mainstreaming some of the most poisonous right-wing ideologies out there right now, which in turn is helping MAGA flourish. So today we're talking to Sarah Posner, an excellent scholar of the religious right who has written several books on the topic and writes about this mainstreaming effect regularly. Really glad to have you on today, Sarah.
Thanks for having me again, Greg.
Okay, so this group is called the True Texas Project. It continues to work with Republicans like Cruz and Paxton. As the Texas Tribune reports, its agenda for its 15th anniversary celebration next month explicitly says that there is a, quote, war on white America, which is supposed to mean, I think, that white Americans are being intentionally replaced through a combination of deliberately engineered immigration and the suppression of native birth rates. It openly embraces Christian nationalism. Can you talk about this group a bit and where it fits into the broader constellation of such groups and ideologies?
Well, something that I thought was really interesting in the very excellent Texas Tribune story was that this group started as a Tea Party group and evolved into this True Texas Project, as they call themselves now. So I think it sheds some light into how gradually through the Tea Party and predecessor movements, and then accelerated by Trump's 2016 candidacy, groups that espouse these openly racist Christian nationalist views have been increasingly brought into the mainstream, not the mainstream of American politics, but the mainstream of the Republican Party.
Absolutely. And Great Replacement theory in particular is being mainstreamed at the highest levels of Republican power right now. This group goes on and on about it in its agenda planning, and you can go way higher. House Speaker Mike Johnson recently offered a soft version of it, saying that Biden and Democrats are intentionally letting in migrants to turn them into voters, and many other top Republicans have said that as well, including another GOP leader in the House, Elise Stefanik, and of course Donald Trump, who recently made this all hyper explicit by declaring that migrants poison the blood of America. Can you talk about Great Replacement theory in particular, what it is and how it's being mainstreamed and what that means?
Well, it's a conspiracy theory that claims that certain groups, especially Jews, are working through George Soros and other bogeymen to bring in immigrants, and especially Black and brown immigrants, who would eventually outnumber and quote unquote replace white Americans. And it's a backlash movement that is rooted in not only fear or bigotry around immigration, but also ties together other racist elements of the right, including anti-critical race theory or anti-DEI segments of the right. It's one big package of, oh my God, white people are under threat in America. And the reason why America is failing is because white people are having their rights taken away, or they're being persecuted, or they're not being allowed to speak or express conservative beliefs. These are all part of the same ideology which surrounds claims on the radical racist right that there's a white genocide going on in America right now.
White genocide theory is a really virulent version of this all, and it's really interesting to me that you bring up the anti-Semitic overtones of certain versions of Great Replacement theory, because this group in Texas in particular is really trying to shed the anti-Semitic side of the theory, right? They're basically accusing liberals and the left of tagging Great Replacement theory with the idea that it's anti-Semitic and involves a conspiracy perpetrated usually by Jews, George Soros, and so forth. So they're very consciously aware of what a liability that is to this theory, and they are trying actively to sanitize it by shedding that, right? I mean, isn't that interesting? I've not seen this before. Have you, where they really go out of their way to shed that part of it?
I think that this is a consequence of the Republican Party trying very hard at this particular moment to present itself as the not anti-Semitic party. So if you look at Elise Stefanik's show trials with the Ivy League university presidents, or efforts to portray anyone who is critical of the Israeli government and the war in Gaza as being anti-Semitic, equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, they really, I think, are working hard to position themselves as the party that loves the Jews.
Right. And it's kind of interesting that they are doing that at the same time as all these kind of anti-Semitically overtoned theories are swirling around in their ranks.
Well, I think they're trying to redefine what anti-Semitism is, right? They have all these anti-Semitic people in their circles. The article mentions people like Andrew Torba and Nick Fuentes, who are openly anti-Semitic. So you can't invite Nick Fuentes to your conference or show up at his conference or have any association with Nick Fuentes and try to claim that you are not anti-Semitic. Nick Fuentes admires Hitler. He openly admires Hitler. So, there's no debate there. But I really think that for them, they want to redefine it. They want to redefine it as the left is anti-Semitic. The left is anti-Semitic because they quote unquote hate Israel, or the left is anti-Semitic because they're pro-Palestinian. And this is all part of an effort. It's part of an effort for domination in U.S. politics. And it's also part of how certain realignments or reshaping of coalitions are happening. And a lot of it, and it is anti-Semitic to even try to realign your political allies around trying to present yourself as the least anti-Semitic.
I think it's worth reminding everybody that Donald Trump hosted Nick Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago. Let me ask you, how important are groups like this one in Texas to this kind of overall campaign? Mike Johnson feels required to offer a sanitized version of Great Replacement theory, although Trump doesn't, as we said. But for these ideologies to flourish, you kind of need grassroots groups like this one going all the way to keep the ideas fresh and the emotions raw, right? At the elite levels, you've got them kind of bandying around and mainstreaming softer versions of the theory, but at the grassroots level, like with this group, you've got them really torquing it up to 11 and really kind of keeping those ideas relevant for people at that grassroots level. Can you talk about that dynamic a bit, how that works?
So it's significant that this is happening in Texas because Texas is like a training ground for later replication across the country. We've seen this in countless circumstances. I myself have reported on it in the context of the anti-trans movement on the Christian right, which was incubated in Texas. The effort to keep trans people out of bathrooms and locker rooms originated in Texas. And you have a lot of really far-right, powerful figures, very powerfully connected with the state Republican Party, very powerfully connected to, again, these billionaire funders who are in the oil and gas and fracking business. So there's a lot of money undergirding it. And the rest of the country, in terms of the rest of the conservative movement, the Republican Party, they're looking at it. Texas is seen as like a model of success. And so I think you're going to see some discomfort, right? We saw that kind of discomfort with when Fuentes went to Mar-a-Lago, right? And there are a lot of people on the right who really don't know what to do with it because they know that they have to condemn it, but they're really kind of uncomfortable condemning something that Donald Trump did. And they're also uncomfortable with condemning something that's becoming, more mainstream on the right. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody pulls out, if anybody has some issues with it, or if they just try to kind of cover over what their actual participation is. But I think in terms of the mainstreaming of Great Replacement theory, being anti-immigration is very common on the right. And this is just a not necessarily far leap for a lot of people who've been inculcated with a lot of anti-immigrant rhetoric for a long time to make.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear you saying is that white nationalists and adherents of Great Replacement theory are really a part of the Republican coalition, and they need to be nurtured and brought along and felt like they have a place in the tent and so forth. Can we bring in Christian nationalism here? I know that's a contested term, but this group in Texas is fully embracing the label. In their agenda, they say, quote, "Yeah, we said it and we're not afraid of it," close quote. They also say they're deliberately doing this kind of thing to move the discussion to the right. That's explicit. You've got leading MAGA Republicans embracing Christian nationalism openly, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Doug Mastriano, who mounted the failing candidacy for governor in Pennsylvania in 2022, was a big proponent. You've written about that. How does this fit into the half-century history of the religious right, which is your specialty? Is it something different and new, or is it a continuation of certain strains? How do we understand that? Feeling distressed about the Supreme Court's recent rulings, or about the justices' blatant conflicts of interest? Maybe you just want to know how the court crumbled to its current state. Michael Waldman, president of the Brennan Center for Justice, explores the conservative lurch of the Supreme Court in his new book, The Supermajority: How the Supreme Court Divided America, out now in paperback. Waldman examines the court's turbulent recent years and how landmark decisions reversed decades of progress. During this pivotal time for our democratic institutions, Waldman's analysis provides historical context for our current moment and answers for how we can reform the court to restore its legitimacy. Pick up your copy of The Supermajority and go to BrennanCenter.org to learn more.
Well, I recently wrote a piece for Talking Points Memo called The Christian Nationalist Hydra, because I think it has come to mean different things to different people, including people who consider themselves to be Christian nationalists and people who other people consider to be Christian nationalists but wouldn't accept the label. So I think what you have going on here is people, if you look at people like, let's take Tony Perkins, the president of the Family Research Council as an example, who has rejected the label, who has claimed that it's a left-wing slur against Christians. Yet, basically what the ideology of the Family Research Council is that America was founded as a Christian nation. It has lost that Christian heritage owing to LGBTQ rights and abortion and secularization, and we need to restore Christian America. Well, that's Christian nationalism. You might not like the label, but fine, right? And the history of the religious right is a movement that has sought, through the democratic process, to win elections, take office, encourage Republican presidents to appoint like-minded people to the federal bench, to appoint people to political appointments in federal agencies, who will institute like-minded policies. This is a Christian nationalist agenda, right? But they also don't want they don't want to say that because they don't want to kind of turn other people off. And they also don't want to give any credence to what they view as a left-wing attack on them. Then you have what I would consider to be the more radical element of the Christian right. Somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who honestly I think has really pissed off somebody like Tony Perkins. I reported at MSNBC about how he basically had Mike Johnson's back when she was threatening to file the motion to vacate to knock him off the speakership recently. So I think there's tension there, tension that they don't really want to talk about in public, right? And so there's these people like Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book about Christian nationalism, which is extremely radical and racist and anti-Semitic.
He's going to be in Texas, right? He's going to be at this thing?
He's going to be at the conference, right? Like, this is like a much more radically right and openly racist part of this Christian nationalist hydra that I talked about, right? And I'm not really sure what it's going to take to make all of this come to a head, because I don't think that it's really a fight that the more traditional Christian right wants to have, especially in public. I think they want to win this upcoming presidential election, and they want to have more opportunities to institute their policies and to get more judges appointed. And so perhaps, bringing attention to it may not be in their favor. But then when you have somebody who's also an ally of people like Tony Perkins, being an ally of this Texas group, it puts somebody like that in a complicated position. Donald Trump didn't really suffer any consequences for being in similarly complicated positions, for being friends with, being allies with people like Tony Perkins and Ralph Reed, and also winking and nodding with actual Nazis on Twitter during his 2016 campaign. But I don't know if Ted Cruz can pull something like that off like Donald Trump could.
Here again, I think you've got a recognition that they have to keep the white nationalists and the Christian nationalists happy. They're essential parts of the Republican and conservative coalition right now, which brings me to this. How does Christian nationalism intersect with the Great Replacement theory? The overlap is white Christian nationalism, right? The idea that whiteness and evangelical Christianity in particular are essential to American national identity?
I think that a lot of evangelicals would, on the one hand, say things that were anti-immigrant. They would say things that, they would be anti-CRT or anti-DEI, but they would reject, I think, some of the more overt white racist commentary from some of these further right white nationalists. So I do think that there's a rhetorical difference, even though, the Christian right percolated out of basically racial grievance as a result of the civil rights movement and school desegregation. But I also think that there are a lot of people on the Christian right who have, for a long time, wanted to make the movement more diverse, knowing that they needed to be not so white to keep winning elections. But I think now that maybe they think they don't need to win elections, that they can just claim that it's stolen and have a coup, they are not that worried about that. But I do see a distinction. Like, I don't see all of them lumped together with Nick Fuentes or Stephen Wolfe types. But it's very worrisome, for example, when you see somebody like Russell Vought, who was in the news recently for basically wanting to rewrite the Constitution and give Trump vast new powers in a second term. You know, he also identifies as a Christian nationalist and thinks that the government should be run according to these supposedly Christian principles.
In this narrative that someone like Russell Vought subscribes to, it seems that we're in the midst of a demographic and religious emergency, and anything goes, and unshackled strongman is what's necessary to save us. And it's worth noting that Trump supporters, MAGA Nation, are pretty receptive to these messages. There was a recent Pew poll that tried to get at some of this stuff. It found that fewer than half of Trump supporters see racial, ethnic, and religious diversity as something that strengthens our country, whereas 65% overall see diversity that way. And only 36% of Trump voters see openness to people from all over the world as essential to who we are as a nation, versus 61% of overall voters who saw it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that Donald Trump and the Christian right, he has changed the Christian right, and they are together changing the Republican Party.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about how Trump is changing the religious right?
Well, they haven't changed their positions on their core issues, which are basically being against abortion and LGBTQ rights and against the separation of church and state and elevating religious freedom for conservative Christians over everybody else. That's still the core of the movement. But whereas they used to focus so much on the importance of getting out the vote, that Christians need to go out and vote so that good Christian leaders will get into office and govern according to the Christian principles that we want upheld. And they put a lot of money into get out the vote efforts. They put a lot of money and resources into recruiting people to run for office, which I think they are still doing. But they're also less interested in democracy now, right? So they want to have their own handpicked candidates running for office, but they don't really care so much about whether the democratic process is respected or not. And the evidence for that is, white evangelicals are more likely than almost any other demographic, except for Republicans as a whole, to believe the stolen election lie, to believe that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president of the United States. And so it doesn't bode well for 2024 in terms of what their reaction is going to be if Trump doesn't win.
I mean, white nationalists, white supremacists, Christian nationalists were essential to the base of the January 6th movement, right?
Of course. And I think that one of the overlooked aspects of January 6th was how much these, sort of Christian dominionist or Christian supremacist ideas were propelling a lot of people to show up for the pre-January 6th events like Stop the Steal and the Jericho March. And on January 6th itself, I think that too many people, including, unfortunately, the January 6th committee, did not want to address that. But it was there and it was real, and we shut it out and ignore it at our peril, I think.
Speaking of all this, it would be remiss not to bring up Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. On audio secretly recorded by activist Lauren Windsor, Alito essentially said that the war in this country is probably not resolvable between religious and secular forces. And a lot of people interpreted that in the kind of in the context of the set of ideas you're talking about here, the dominionist inclination. Can you talk a little bit about what you took from the Alito audio?
Well, he said that the country needed to be returned to godliness, right? And that this is a war that, there's no compromise here, that, one side has to come out on top, and it's the side that would return our country to godliness. I think he's sort of a standard issue, right-wing, devout Catholic Republican, honestly, which is a part of the Christian right, together with white evangelicals, right? And he sees the country as divided into people who are preserving a certain way of life and people who are trying to tear that down. I mean, that's at the heart of all of this, right? This idea that there's a certain America that's been lost to all of these, dirty hippies and feminists and liberals and and secularists who want to infringe on Christians' free speech or ability to practice their religion or to express their religious beliefs in the public square. And you can see that in Alito's opinions, his opinion in Dobbs, his opinion in Hobby Lobby, and other cases. He's a true believer.
Can I ask, this Texas group meeting, it really is going to open a window on what's going on with all these ideas and with all these kind of swirling movements, right? What are you going to be watching for?
Well, I would watch the most for who are going to be the high-level people there speaking, right? Who are going to be the keynote speakers or the politicians and top figures in the Republican Party or in the Texas Republican Party who are going to show up there, especially after this article came out. And because I think that that's a window into how much this is being not only tolerated, but embraced by the party as a whole.
I would add that the fact that there was an explosion of outrage on Twitter and social media among liberals among this is going to make the conference a whole lot more attractive to top Republicans and conservatives.
Right. I mean, their position is if we've pissed, make the liberals cry. If we pissed off the liberals, we must be doing something right. So, yeah.
Well, Sarah Posner, it's always great to talk to you, really. This was a good one. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
Folks, we have some great new content for you up at TNR.com. As always, Parker Malloy on a new case study in how a right-wing group and the right-wing media stirred up controversy over trans rights. And Matt Ford looking at the real lesson behind all those secretly recorded Supreme Court tapes. We'll see you all tomorrow. You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.